Every champion there ever was has defied some sort of odds to reach that pinnacle. But some champions defy odds that are much greater than others. In 2004, the Detroit Pistons did something nobody thought they could do, not even going into the final series against the Los Angeles Lakers. But before we get into that, let's take a deeper look onto just how they got there. The story of the 2004 Pistons really begins after the 1999-2000 season. With the Pistons not getting past the first round of the playoffs in almost 10 years, they went and hired NBA Hall of Famer and Detroit Piston legend Joe Dumars as team president. One of his first moves as team president was to trade Grant Hill to the Orlando Magic and receive Chucky Atkins and a throw-in player by the name of Ben Wallace. Although Wallace was considered the throw-in player in the trade, he ended up being the key piece to championship defense. Even with Wallace anchoring the defense, the team greatly lacked talent and won only 32 games in 2000-2001. So it was time for Dumars to make more moves. In 2002, Dumars would trade another fan favorite in guard Jerry Stackhouse to the Washington Wizards for Richard, aka Rip, Hamilton. He also signed journeyman guard Chauncey Billups and drafted Tayshaun Prince with the 23rd overall pick. Billups and Hamilton immediately became one of the best backcourts in the NBA, and Tayshaun Prince was the perfect wing defender and role player for a team on the rise. Rick Carlisle took over as coach in 2002, and the Pistons won 50 games for the next 2 years, but were bounced in the playoffs both times. Most notably, in 2003, in the Eastern Conference Finals, they were swept by the New Jersey Nets. At this point, the rebuild was complete, and it was time to contend for a title. So Dumars made a change that shocked the NBA world. He fired Rick Carlisle and replaced him with Hall of Fame head coach Larry Brown. The Pistons were considered contenders, but were 7th in the preseason odds at plus 1,500 to win the NBA championship. The heavy favorites that year, at plus 140 odds, were the Los Angeles Lakers, who we'll get to later. The Pistons came into the year similar to the way they were the last 2 years. A very good team, but a bit inconsistent. At one point they won 13 straight games, but in the midst of a 6-game losing streak, it was clear something was missing. So Dumars went out and got the final piece of the puzzle in a blockbuster 3-team trade where he acquired Rasheed Wallace. The 6'11 power forward who could stretch the floor on offense and add to the already stout defense was the perfect addition to a tough, gritty team. They went on to win 20 of their final 25 games and finished second in the Eastern Conference. The championship run began against the 7-seed Milwaukee Bucks in the first round, whom they easily took care of in 5 games. In the conference semifinal, they faced their first big test against the back-to-back Eastern Conference champions and the team that swept them the year prior, the New Jersey Nets. The Pistons were hungry for revenge and steamrolled the Nets in the first 2 games at home by double digits. But things would change when the series shifted to New Jersey. The Nets dismantled the Pistons in games 3 and 4, winning both games on their home court by 15 or more points. And now things shifted to a pivotal game 5 at the Palace of Auburn Hills. In a back-and-forth affair that saw the Pistons leading with just under 2 minutes left, the Nets roared back and led by 3 with just over 3 seconds left to play. It was there where Chauncey Billups truly earned his name, Mr. Big Shot, and sent the game into overtime.
Pistons need a 3, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the 3. Overtime.
But ultimately, the Pistons committed too many fouls as 4 of their 5 starters fouled out, and they ended up losing in triple overtime, falling down 3-2 and heading back to New Jersey for Game 6. With a chance to advance on their home floor, the Nets came out on fire, starting off with a 13-2 lead early on in the first quarter. But they weathered the storm, and their dominant defense held the Nets to just 75 points as they sent the series to an unlikely Game 7. In Game 7, it was more of the same from the defense as they held the Nets to under 70 points and advanced to the conference finals in blowout fashion. Holding opponents under 70 points was a common occurrence for this Piston team. Including the regular season, they accomplished this feat 16 times. Although the Pistons had just overcome a 3-2 deficit against the back-to-back Eastern Conference champions, they knew their toughest test was yet to come. Awaiting them in the conference final was their former head coach, NBA's top seed, and division rival Indiana Pacers. The Pacers took 3 of the 4 regular season meetings, with neither team scoring more than 89 points, and the defensive mastery would continue in this series. The Pistons held a 2-point lead late in Game 1, but after a couple clutch buckets, including a huge three-pointer by Reggie Miller, Indiana pulled out the victory. Prior to a must-win Game 2, Rasheed Wallace made a bold prediction to spark his team.
In the front page, back page, middle of the page, wherever, headliners, column 1 or 2, we will win Game 2.
You got backing off?
We will win Game 2.
A bold statement to say the least, that certainly lit up the intensity from each team, but it was exactly what the Pistons needed, as they put together one of their best defensive performances of the season. In a tightly contested affair, which is the theme between these two teams, the Pistons recorded 19 blocks, including 5 from Rasheed Wallace. But the most pivotal block of the game, and maybe the series, and even possibly the season for the Pistons, came from one of the greatest hustle plays of all time. What Tayshaun Prince did was so incredible that not only should it be discussed as one of the best blocks of all time, but perhaps one of the greatest plays in NBA history. Words don't really do it justice, so I'll just let you watch it again for yourselves.
4 on the shot clock. I don't know if Phillips knows that. He lost the handle. Tinsley, Reggie Miller, and it's blocked again. Oh, what a block! How did Prince get there? What a block!
I love the call by Doc Rivers as well. You can just hear the disbelief in his voice, and the disbelief on Jermaine O'Neal's face as you see here. Carrying that momentum into Game 3, the Pistons led throughout. Although the score was close, it was a wire-to-wire victory for Detroit and a 2-1 series lead. Game 4 was just the opposite though. With the Pacers facing a potential 3-1 series deficit, the defense came out strong and held the Pistons to under 70 points as they tied the series up at 2 games apiece, heading back to Indiana for a pivotal Game 5. Although frustrated, the Pistons remained confident. And in Game 5, it looked as if a new star was born. The Pistons' defense was great as always, holding Indiana to under 70 points once again. But Rip Hamilton led the way with 33 points on 12 of 22 shooting to lead Detroit to a Game 5 victory on the road. Facing elimination, the Pacers came out strong. Leading by 6 at half and holding a lead until late in the fourth quarter, it looked like the series might be headed back to Indiana for Game 7. But the Pistons' defense kept them in the game like they have all season, and Rip Hamilton once again stepped up when needed. He led all scorers with 21 points, including 9 in the fourth quarter, as the Pistons, once again, held an opponent to under 70 points, and they advanced to the NBA Finals. An incredible accomplishment for a team that has already defied so many odds just to get to this point, but they knew they still had one more hill to climb. Waiting for them on the other side was the prohibitive favorite, a team with 4 future Hall of Famers, a Hall of Fame head coach, a team that won 3 of the last 4 NBA titles, the Los Angeles Lakers. In terms of odds, the Lakers entered as minus 550 favorites, meaning you would need to bet $550 just to win 100, and the Pistons entered as plus 400 underdogs, meaning a $100 bet on them would win you 400. It's fair to say that Karl Malone and Gary Payton were both past their prime, but Kobe and Shaq were not. Kobe was right in the middle of his, and Shaq was on the tail end of his prime, but still on paper, they were an overwhelming favorite by everybody across the NBA world.
The NBA. Talk to the folks in Las Vegas. The Pistons, I have not seen picked to win the series anywhere. How do they contend and make it a long series?
If you don't understand my point by now, the Pistons had no chance, right? The Lakers entered Game 1 as 8-point favorites at home, but the game was tightly contested throughout. The Lakers held a 1-point lead at halftime, yet the Pistons' defense continued to frustrate the Lakers, as they took a second-half lead that they would never let go of. Chauncey Billups again earned his name Mr. Big Shot, and the Pistons made a huge statement on the road in Game 1. The Pistons dominated on defense, as they held the Lakers to 75 points on 39% shooting, 23 points less than their 98 points per game that regular season. The overall performance in Game 1 shocked the NBA world.
If somebody told you O'Neal would get 34, Bryant would get 25, Rasheed Wallace would have foul trouble and not play very much in the first half, you'd be in Los Angeles, you'd be facing the vaunted Lakers, and you'd win by about a dozen. What were those odds?
But at the end of the day, it was only one game, and most people around the NBA felt that it was a fluke, or that the Lakers didn't take the Pistons serious. So once again, the Pistons had something to prove, and more odds to defy. For the second game in a row, the Lakers were 8-point favorites at home. For the second straight game though, the Pistons hung tough with the Lakers, trailing by 2 heading into the fourth quarter. The Pistons played well in the fourth quarter, and led by 6 with 47 seconds left. The game seemed all but over, but that's when Shaq and Kobe showed their true star power. After a 3-point play by Shaq, and a miss by Billups on the other end, Kobe came down and made one of the greatest plays of the series. Down by 3 and facing a potential 2-0 series deficit, Kobe made a miraculous shot to send the game into overtime. The Lakers went on to win in overtime, handing the Pistons a crushing Game 2 defeat, but the Pistons had nothing to hang their head about, as the series was tied at 1 game apiece heading back to Detroit. But after Game 2, many people felt the Pistons were in trouble and the Lakers had woken up. So Rasheed Wallace decided to address the media again.
Granted, they're a good team, but we ain't scared of them, man. I don't know why y'all cats think we scared of the Lakers, or, like the Lakers are this dominant force. We ain't scared of them cats, man.
And the Pistons backed his words with another incredible defensive performance, holding Kobe and Shaq to 25 points combined, as the Lakers shot 37% from the field and were held to under 70 points for the first time in their franchise's history in the shot clock era. For the second straight game, the odds makers had Game 4 as a pick'em, meaning it could go either way. Facing a potential 3-1 deficit, the Lakers changed their approach. They decided to feed Shaq early and often. And to an extent it was working, as O'Neal completely dominated, but the rest of the Lakers couldn't get it going, as the Pistons were able to remain in the game. Heading into the fourth quarter, the score was tied at 56, but the Pistons' team effort triumphed the one-man onslaught and put the mighty Lakers on the brink of elimination. Rasheed Wallace had his best game of the series, scoring 26 points to go along with 13 rebounds, 2 blocks, and numerous clutch baskets down the stretch. Shaq finished with a monstrous 36 points, 20 rebounds, and only 2 turnovers on 16 of 21 shooting, but the rest of the Lakers combined for 44 points, and Kobe scored 20 on 8 of 25 shooting.
Lakers came into the series heavily favored. Detroit a big underdog. But the Piston upset in Game 1, and then it took divine intervention, NBA style, for the Lakers to win Game 2. Detroit thoroughly dominated Game 3, and the Pistons have put themselves in a position to clinch the NBA title Tuesday.
Entering Game 5, the Pistons had completely changed the narrative. For the first time all series, Detroit was favored by the odds makers, as the spread was -3.5. On the other side, the once viewed invincible Lakers were facing an unfathomable 3-1 series deficit. As Game 5 commenced, the Pistons smelled blood, and this gritty, tough-minded, blue-collar unit was not about to let a title slip through their hands. The Lakers got off to a decent start, leading by 7 midway through the first quarter, but the Pistons went on a run and eventually took the lead that they would never relinquish. By the third quarter, the game was a complete blowout. The Pistons led for 39 of a possible 48 minutes in Game 5, and it seemed like that was the theme most of the series. A series in which everyone felt it would be the complete opposite. The Lakers were supposed to be the ones dominating. They were supposed to be the winners in Game 5, or even a sweep, and it turned out they were lucky to not get swept. So how did this happen? Well, it's actually quite simple. The Lakers were more of a group of individuals, and the Pistons were a team. The Lakers had their off-the-court issues and a poorly balanced roster. They lacked depth, and players didn't fit well together. In simpler terms, it was basically the complete opposite of the Pistons. The Pistons had a well-rounded, well-put-together team that loved playing with one another. After winning the title, Chauncey Billups said himself that they may have had better individual players, but we always felt that we were a better team. The following season, Shaquille O'Neal was traded to the Miami Heat, and Phil Jackson was no longer the coach of the Lakers. Meanwhile, the Pistons made it back to the NBA Finals, losing in Game 7 to the Spurs, putting to bed any thought of them being a fluke.